He went out into the desert for 40 years before God's call and anointing on his life was actually fulfilled when he came back to be used by God to deliver the Hebrew people from captivity in Egypt. Joseph spent years in prison before he actually saw the dream that God had given him fulfilled. And even Jesus, the Messiah, even Jesus spent 30 years in a carpenter's shop working before he actually entered into the fulfillment of the dream and the vision that God had for his life. So the question might come, why do we have to wait? Why does it work this way? And I think the answer is that God wants to work on us before he works through us. He wants to work in us before he works through us. And so this delayed period is a time when God really works in our hearts and our lives to strengthen our faith, to give us deeper perspective of who he is and how he works. A few things I have written down is it teaches us to trust God. We learn that his timing is perfect, so that as we forge ahead actually into the dream, there are going to be hardships. Well, we learn his timing is perfect and we can trust him. We learn that delays never destroy his purpose. We learn to be patient. None of this would happen if we just went instantly from decision to actuality. And so a delay is not the end of things. But this delay period is a period of time in which we grow and we mature so that we are better prepared to actually engage with the dream and the vision when we get to it. So I've been reading a book about Ulysses S. Grant and the Civil War, and the battles that were fought in the western half of the Civil War. Most of the things I've read or seen have all been in Virginia in the eastern half. But one of the things I just read was that they were at a point where they needed more men, and so they were getting all these fresh recruits in. And they didn't want fresh recruits. They wanted people that had been in the military for some time. They wanted people who had some seasoning to them because they were going into battle. And so this delay period is the period in which God seasons our lives, in which our hearts grow stronger, and we learn to walk with God more closely and to rely upon him more fully, so that when we do engage the dream and the battle actually intensifies at that point, then we're better prepared to actually move ahead with it. So fourth point is this difficulty. There will be difficulty along the way. So here's some exciting news, that not only do you have to wait, not only do you get to wait, but you also get hardship during that waiting period. There will also be difficulty that comes during the waiting period. And that's just part of it. And two primary kinds. One's circumstantial, things that happen that are difficult. And the other one is through critics, people that come in to the situation that make it hard for us to move ahead, or actually critique our decisions and our dream itself. Moses had difficulty. Even once he had engaged the dream, he experienced incredible difficulty. He led the children of Israel out of Egypt, and they get through the Red Sea, and they're in the desert, and first thing that happens is they don't have any water, and then food starts to run low, and then they have an insurrection and rebellion, and then there are snakes that invade the camp, and thousands of people are bitten by poisonous snakes. He just had one problem after another, even after he had actually engaged the dream that God had given to him. And he was in the process of seeing that dream fulfilled. David was anointed king of Israel, and yet then went through a season of time where he not only waited, but he was actually hunted down by Saul. Saul wanted to kill him. And David had already been anointed king. And so not only does he have to go through this period of waiting, but he faces incredible persecution and hardship through it. Joseph had a dream that he was going to lead his brothers and rule over his brothers, and he was going to save his people. But then he was sold into slavery after he had that dream. And then he was accused of rape and cast into prison, and they're all alone. No one even knows he's there. Through this whole season of time, can you imagine that? The despair that he could have given into, and the hardship that he could have embraced as far as just giving up on anything for the future. Joshua, the Bible tells us that Moses led them out of Egypt and then in the wilderness for 40 years, and then Joshua got to take them into the promised land. And you would think, well, boy, that's the job I would want. The promised land, doesn't that sound great? But you know what it also says? It says, and there were giants in the land. And so the fulfillment of the dream included battling giants. And so the dream never comes easy. There's always difficulty and pain and hardship involved in it. And one of the reasons for that is very simply, we live in a broken, fallen world. And when I grasp God's dream for my life, it is going to sync with His dream for the world. It's going to be part of His dream for the world. And His dream for this broken world is to redeem it. To redeem it back from the pain and the grief and the sin and the suffering. And there's warfare involved in that, because God has an enemy who stirs the pain and grief and sin and suffering. And so when I grasp God's dream for my life, and it's part of His bigger dream for the world, then I should expect that along with having a purposeful life that will keep me going and give me a reason to live, and will make life an adventure, along with that there's going to be difficulty and hardship and warfare. But then what God promises to do through the difficulty is to work in our lives. And we see in 1 Peter, it says this: "At present, you may be temporarily harassed by all kinds of trials. This is no accident. It happens to prove your faith, which is infinitely more valuable than gold." You see, the hardships that we go through refine our faith. The pains that we go through and difficulties refine our faith. That's what it means when it says prove your faith. It doesn't mean to prove it in the sense of, well, here's how much faith I have, but in the sense of purifying it. It purifies our faith. And so, what's next? Well, step 5 is we go from bad to worse, from difficulty to dead end. And when you hit the dead end point, things often move from difficult to impossible, I think is the byline there. We hit a point where it seems impossible, that nothing can happen that would ever retrieve this. Even Paul went through days like this and seasons like this. In 2 Corinthians, here's what we read from the Apostle Paul, who was an early follower of Christ, who wrote much of the New Testament, and he said, "At that time we were completely overwhelmed." He says, "The burden was more than we could bear. In fact, we told ourselves that this was the end. Yet now we believe that we had this sense of impending disaster so that we might learn to trust not in ourselves, but in God who can raise the dead." You see, Paul, as he was going through one of these horribly difficult periods that came right up to the point of a dead end, where he saw no hope, and he saw no way out, and no future. And he says the reason for that was God wanted to show us what He could do. God wanted to show us what it's like to serve a God who has power to raise the dead. And real simply put, if God can raise people physically from the dead, then He can also raise people who are dead spiritually, people who are dead emotionally. He can restore and revive dead marriages. He can bring life back to them. He can heal the bodies of people that are sick and filled with disease. He can provide the new job. He can revive the dead career. And the list goes on and on. If God can raise the dead, then He can do anything. And when we go through hardships in life and we feel like we're at a dead end, what we're learning is what it means to know a God who can raise the dead, to know a God who can take us through those hardships. So the problem is that as long as we think that we can fix situations in and of ourselves, we'll try to do it. And so we have to come to the point where we're hopeless. Even Abraham, who had been given this promise that he would be the father of many nations, when he came to the point that he saw he and Sarah had not had children yet, he and Sarah cooked up a scheme where they tried to fulfill God's promise through Abraham having a child through Sarah's handmaid. And yet that was not God's plan for them. That was not God's plan for how this was all going to work out.